RNN.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means.
Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. Tonight's featured show is Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. Welcome to the Republic News Network for our live national broadcast. You may call me Kelby, and tonight I'm going to be acting as your moderator. The RNN, which stands for the Republic News Network, has been doing this radio show since 2010, and it's always been a friendly introduction for the people of the United States Corporation. Here we go. It's true. The United States is a federal corporation, and their exclusive jurisdiction is in the District of Columbia. The Republic government was simply a bunch of U.S. citizens that in law don't have access to the Bill of Rights, and they realized they wanted to be Americans as our founders and our law provided each and every one of us. See, we've been hard at work since 2008, and since 2010, we have successfully re-inhabited the original government vacated under Lincoln in 1861. I know, it's hard to understand. Don't worry. We are law-abiding, peaceful Americans and very pro-government, and we love our country. You can consider the Republic members are tired of the corruption that we see every day. See, we found in the law that there is two forms of government here on the land, and we did something about it. We are people. Mothers, fathers, sons, daughters. We have families just like you. We simply found some truths, and now we're sharing these important truths with the rest of the world. So get ready to hear things that sound amazing, and get ready to understand that you too are about to be a part of history. We welcome each one of you to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel and your Republic if you so choose. But before we go into our broadcast tonight, please bow your head in prayer.
Father, we want to thank you for this opportunity to just get updated and get an understanding of our minds wrapped around what's going on in this world from an insider, Lord. Just bless these people on this phone call. Bless this republic, and we thank you for the truth to be told, and we pray this in your son's name. Amen. Mr. Happel, I yield the floor to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Kelby. Tonight we have a very, very special guest on. Our guest is Major General Paul Vallely, retired. Paul is a true patriot in the American sense of patriotism. He's also a personal friend, and I know him quite well, and I have to say, Paul, that I've looked very much forward to having you back on the show. You recently attended and spoke at the Valdai Conference in Moscow. And can you tell our listeners about that conference and the focus on Russian-American relations that were a big part of that conference?
Well, sure, Dan, and thank you again for having me back on the show. And I applaud all your efforts in the Republic of standing up for our Constitution and trying to get the truth out to the world. And it's the truth as we know it and as we've experienced, and I've experienced over, goodness now, 77 years. But I was the American that was asked to come to speak to the Valdai Conference in Moscow 3 weeks ago. It is probably the top think tank in Moscow. And this year's topic and theme was the Middle East. When will tomorrow come in the Middle East? Now, what was interesting, though, were the attendees there. Mostly the Middle East countries. No Europeans were invited, which was interesting. So I had the opportunity to be on one of the panels and then meet with a gentleman from Saudi Arabia named Khashoggi, who is the principal advisor to the King of Saudi Arabia. He and I did a separate 1 hour program for the press over there. But it was very interesting to get their take on what was happening with ISIS, the, I guess, bad relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran, of course, what was happening in Syria, Iraq, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda. And all of those subjects were covered in detail. And I was happy to represent the United States there discussing the new presidency under President Trump and what we could expect from a strategic planning standpoint. And that was very well received, by the way. They were very pro-Trump over there. They were very happy that America had new leadership. And we can get into more detail on the Middle East as they see it, if you'd like.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yes. How do the Russian political and military leaders perceive the change in policy and the national focus of the Trump administration versus the Obama administration?
Well, if you want to go back 8 or 9 years and you want to really analyze the Obama administration and reaching out to the Russians and to others and the voids that we've created, the vacuums over there, that from the Russian perspective and even the members that were there at Valdai, that America had lost its credibility and respect over the years because we didn't seem to be dealing from a strength of a country of a superpower that was not only superpower militarily, but financially and economically and also culturally in many ways. So I think they're optimistic, and I think even the recent events I can discuss with you regarding Syria and the actions just taken in the last week or two. But they're very positive that we have a better government now, a more focused government, but one government that's not going to get involved in being the national police for the world anymore. And of course, we can discuss the recent bombing in Syria as a sidelight or a sidebar on that. But it was a very positive meeting, and I happened to be able to meet with Ambassador Mikhail Bogdanov, who is Putin's senior foreign minister diplomat for the Middle East and Syria. And I had met him over a year ago in Paris at the Russian embassy when we discussed the refugee resettlement plan there. So these are a number of things we can discuss, but basically they're happy to the point that they want America to reach back to them as they want to reach to us. And I've got to tell a lot of people, you know, Russia's never attacked the United States. Of course, you can say now, well, hacking and all these alleged things, but far more Americans have been killed by other nations in the world and in the Middle East than the Russians have ever done. So I guess my thesis is that we're not going to solve the problems in the Middle East without working with Russia.
Yeah, I agree with that. I can't see any way that we could possibly be dealing in the Middle East without the assistance of Russia in consulting. And I think, frankly, the Russians are looking for us not only to provide leadership, but my understanding is that they also are there for us to provide the common sense and the non, I guess, interventionist perspective of the Trump administration. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I think from the standpoint of intervening in a lot of foreign affairs, the way we went into the Middle East with Iraq, the way we went into Libya, the way we supported the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And of course, you know, I made 2 trips to Egypt and met with General al-Sisi. And of course, I've been in the Middle East 6 times. A lot of your listeners probably don't know, but I'm the only senior American that's been inside Syria in the last 5 years. And I went in to Aleppo in 2013 with 400 men. And I was able to, matter of fact, it was the day after the sarin gas attack from Assad on civilians outside of Damascus, and that was in 2013. So when we see what's happened in the last couple of weeks, I can validate that that regime does use chemical weapons against their citizens.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask about that because there are statements being made that that's a false flag, that that Assad is not the one that's responsible, that it's actually ISIS that's responsible for the chemical attack. So I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Well, when you were there, you know who validates that more than anyone?
Who's
the
that?
Syrian people.
Yeah.
The Syrian people that I met with, they're the ones that can validate it to the world, not a bunch of outside people trying to analyze it from Washington, D.C. or Paris or London or other places. The Syrian people can validate where those attacks came from.
Good. Well, that's exactly what we're looking for, and your expertise in Syria, I think, as you say, you're really the only senior military person that's been inside that area and actually has toured with military leaders from the Syrian resistance to understand just exactly what's going on in Syria. Could you give us a little bit of your background and a little bit more about some of the things that you saw and some of the people that you worked with while you were over there?
Well, again, if I go back when I first went into Iraq in August of 2003, I was with Fox News at that time. I was a senior military analyst. And since, I've gone back for, I can't even count them, but I think there's 7 more trips. But I was invited to fly into Turkey and go down to Antakya in Hatay province in southern Turkey. And we meet with a number of the general officers and ministers that had left the Assad government in 2012 after the peaceful protest started over there, and then Assad turned on the people and started attacking them. And so many of the senior people, a lot of people don't know or understand, they were ministers, they were lawyers, they were part of the government, they were general officers, they were Air Force colonels, and I met probably 40 of them in 2013, and some in 2012 was when I was there. But they were all sectarian. There were no radicals at that time. Al-Qaeda started to come in late 2013 with some small groups. And, of course, that developed into today where we have al-Nusra, we have al-Qaeda elements, and, of course, we have ISIS in the north and eastern part of Syria. But the senior generals that I met with all wanted Assad to step down because he was not unifying the people. The people felt that they weren't being treated as equal citizens within Syria. They were deprived of travel. They were deprived of a lot of things that these tyrannical governments do within the Middle East. And so the rebellion grew into the arming of the Free Syrian Army, which basically got their arms and ammunition that they stole from the regular Syrian army. And that's how it all started. Of course, it ended up nobody supported them. I sent a report in 2013 to the Pentagon, as well as to the Intelligence Committee in Congress, and told them that someone's got to take out and close down the Air Force of Assad. Because at that time he was using the MiGs, he was using helicopters and artillery to bombard the outskirts of Damascus, as well as the other cities of Homs and Aleppo and elsewhere. And so over that period of time, we've created over 11 million refugees, I think over 2 million killed, the injured. I don't even know if they have a final count on that. But when I was there, I took a Canadian medical team into Aleppo, but they had 70 amputations at that time in 2013 of children without anesthesia.
Wow. That's awful.
So that's the inhumane efforts of the Assad government. So he can lie today and he can make excuses that it's everybody else's fault. But as I met with the foreign ministry in Moscow 3 weeks ago, and I basically laid it out, and I think the Russians are going to finally understand that, or do now, that Assad cannot lead the people of unifying Syria. He doesn't have the skills. Most of the population hate him. He controls the military now, but even some of the military would go to a new leadership council, which we've recommended, with a new leadership, maybe under a gentleman by the name of General Manaf Slass, T-L-A-S-S. And he left the Assad government as a senior general and is a very historic military family in Syria, and a great gentleman. So there are probably 35 to 40 people that can make up a new interim government in Syria. And Russia knows that. Russia's also met with Manaf. I've met with him. And I think that the Russians, by sometime and later in the year, are going to move Assad aside and have him retire and put a new leadership council in. So look forward to that. Also, Dan, I set up a meeting, or teed it up, I should say, between Putin and Trump in Reykjavik, Iceland, just like Gorbachev and Reagan had a meet in June of this year. So look out for that and see if that comes to pass as we look at the results of the Tillerson meeting in Moscow this week.
Oh, that'd be terrific. And that is the way that we're going to resolve so many of the issues in the Middle East. First of all, and I know your opinion is very strong in this way, first of all, we need to let them settle their own internal affairs, and we need to start to back off and quit trying to be nation builders and allow the good guys in those regimes to have the support that they need to make it work.
Yeah, and again, many of them have met with the Russians already. I think the Russians are keyed up to work with the United States. But the problem, when you look at it back from Moscow's standpoint, we keep blaming the Russians on everything, and they keep laughing saying we really didn't get in there and make sure elections and your voters vote for Trump over Clinton. And, you know, it's all a myth. There's no evidence at all the Russians had anything to do with that. And then, of course, you take WikiLeaks, and but it seems everything that the Democrats or the progressives want to do is to blame Russia for everything. Now, that doesn't mean there wasn't some Russian hacker in Ukraine or Russia or somebody hacking into our systems, just like our high-tech people and our people do, is hack into China, hack into Russia. So we're just as guilty as they are of doing those kind of things. But that's what we call intelligence operations, intelligence gathering. So.
Well, and we also, and this is something that I find it ironic that, you know, the progressives keep talking about how the Russians stole the American election, destroyed our free election, honest election process. We've been manipulating elections around the world since World War II through the CIA and all these clandestine operatives in foreign service.
Over 100 as we've counted them.
Yeah, and mainstream American media has become nothing more than purveyors of fake news and progressive socialist policies, and for them to act like somehow we've screwed up, or the Russians or anyone else has screwed up our honest election process, oh man, give me a break.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to have you. I'd like to have you tell our listeners about your experience with the events that happened in Egypt and Libya under the Clinton State Department. I know we're reaching back a little bit with this, but it kind of builds the I guess let's say the credibility of some of the concerns we have about you know, the way that State Department policy has been handled over the last 8 years. Would you tell us a little bit about your discoveries and the group that you worked with to expose some of the things that happened in Libya and then in Egypt?
Well, I was asked several years ago after the first revolution in Egypt, when Mubarak was set aside and when they had an interim government there, to go over as a co-delegate leader and meet General al-Sisi and report back basically what was the situation. Well, when we went over, we had the State Department actually supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood, by the way, was started in the 1920s in Egypt. Mm-hmm. And so that's the background there. So they've known the Muslim Brotherhood better than anybody. But anyhow, can you believe Obama was supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, the purveyor and support of international terrorism around the world, and the fact that our State Department, our ambassador there, also. And so when I met with General al-Sisi, he looked at me, and there were probably 7 other ministers there and general officers saying, we've been your great ally for over 40 years, and now all of a sudden, because we want to overturn the Muslim Brotherhood in our country and get back to our Constitution and to a democratic government, and you turned your back on us and you declined us the military aid that was already paid for and in the pipeline. And so I went back over a year later and had another meeting with General al-Sisi. But the important thing about that at the time was that Libya was going down, and General al-Sisi turned to me and he said, I can't understand why America makes all its decisions through a political prism. He said, I have to make my decisions through a reality prism. And that was such an epiphany for me. And since that time, he educated me that when I make any decisions or look at these issues, I look through the reality prism, how to solve that issue, and don't look at the politics of it and make it based on a political decision. And if we could all do that, obviously we have to have politics involved in our elections and all that. But after that, we should all look, as representatives of the United States government, our leaders need to look through a reality prism. And I think that's one of the things that President Trump is bringing to the table. He's really looking at the reality prism of the economy, the national security situation, our threats, and what he needs to do to turn America around and become a strong nation again and deal from strength, not weakness.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know one of the things that makes our nation strong is the fact that we've always had credibility as a nation, and I think we've lost that certainly over the last 8 years, but I think we've been losing it for probably since really, and let me say this, but since Ronald Reagan, and not before Ronald Reagan, but after Ronald Reagan.
No, that's true. I think that's a true analysis, Dan.
Well, what it boils down to is that I think the political spectrum or the political prism has become the norm in the United States. And you're right. We need to start looking at the world through reality. And one way to do that is to understand that if we don't walk the walk as well as talk the talk, then we've got no credibility as a nation.
Yep, that's very true. And Bush started off strong after 9/11, and then we got into this crazy trying to build democracy in the Middle East, which many of us knew would never happen. And then this nation building, which was not our job and job of the American people to go around nation building in the world and trying to make them into a democracy. By the Constitution, we're to secure America and protect Americans. Now, that doesn't mean we can't work with allies. We can't do any kind of humanitarian type of things against tyrants like we just did in Syria last week. There's certain things you have to do not to permit these tyrannical dictators to ruin a region of the world or the world as we saw it back in World War II with Hitler. So these are hard decisions that our president has to make, but he's dealing from strength. He sent a strong signal to North Korea. His meeting with China, evidently, Minister there, the president, went very well. And so America now is being looked at as America should be, dealing from strength, but peace through strength.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think that the leadership we've got in place right now, if they just give him a fair chance to do his job, I think we've got leadership that will be almost remarkable in the changes that we'll see in this country. I know your opinion of some of the things that have gone on in the Middle East, and I know you talked about the lily pad policy, military policy, and I know that you've got a lot of reservations about the fact that we went in to Iraq and really went after Saddam Hussein and took him out, and in the process we leave these voids. We leave a power void or a leadership void, and naturally the first people that come into those voids are the people we don't want there. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Well, the lily pad strategy, which I started working on 10 years ago, deals and equates, I think a lot of our military listeners would understand it, is what we call joint strike force operations. That means if there's threats to the United States, if we're anywhere in the world, that we can take out that threat, that target, in 24 hours, anywhere, any place. But we certainly don't have to go in and occupy and set up these enormous, costly bases all around the world that we can, in fact, launch from designated lily pads. Our aircraft carrier groups, for example, are a lily pad. And so when they're extended out there in the Mediterranean or the 7th Fleet in the Pacific, they are the lily pads for that area. But we have lily pads also in Japan and Okinawa and Guam, for example. We still have lily pads in Italy, in Germany, in England, Incirlik Air Force Base in Turkey. So from that standpoint, we do not have to go in and create these tremendously costly bases as we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. I don't think people really understand when you go back. In the fall of 2001, after 9/11, we went into Afghanistan to destroy the Al-Qaeda training sites and Al-Qaeda. In 31 days with 100 special ops and CIA military, B-52s and air support, we basically crushed the Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and sent them with their tails between their legs going back over to Pakistan. But what do? January of 2002, we start putting in more troops. We started to build these bases, and then we had that extension of billions and billions of dollars. Now, there was another plan in Iraq that I should tell you about. The plan in Iraq was to take down Saddam. The plan was for the military to move on that day out to the airport at Baghdad International, set up a security support system for 300 Iraqis that were set to come in and form an interim government. And Bush fell in a weakness and selected a gentleman by the name of Paul Bremer. And we thought we'd set up this interim government type of thing, a coalition, and of course, which was the worst mistake we could make, trying to bring democracy over there and have thinking we could bring the Shias and the Sunnis together. So that was a mistake all after that. And we tried to tell Bush it was a special ops operation. Dan, you could have paid me $10 million to take out Saddam, and I could have done it with the people over there.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
I'm sure you could.
If that was the mission.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing to me, but we don't seem to learn that in the Middle East, the best thing we can do is if we've got to deal with somebody over there, just deal with them and get the heck out of the area. Because the bottom line is when we send troops over, we give them, I guess, the fuel for them to raise volunteers to fight against us. And I don't think a lot of Americans would deny that if, let's say, a country like China came into the United States and then took out some people and then brought troops in and set up military bases, we'd fight them too.
Absolutely, and that's the way it's been. We do not have a good track record at all, and we have the most marvelous armed forces in the world, but we've had absolutely terrible leadership, especially from these politicians who have never served in the military for the most part, do not understand strategy, do not understand if you go to war, you must go to win, and to go to a more modern type of lily pad joint strike force operations to take out those threats, whether they're south of our border or whether they're in Libya or wherever they may be. North Korea now is a good example. So the question is, what will we do about that? But we've had terrible, terrible political leadership in America. Now, Ronald Reagan dealt from strength. He sent a signal to Gaddafi, as you may remember. We had Grenada at that time, was a threat against Americans down there. But we did the thing. We hit a strike operation, conducted it, and we came back home.
Well, and the lesson in Libya was that we whacked Gaddafi, and he completely changed. Yes,
absolutely. And that was the Clinton era. There was an arms deal gone bad that was instrumented by our State Department. Now, why is the State Department in the arms business? And those arms, they ended up going up to Turkey into Syria.
Right.
But Clinton was so naive, as her husband was, and even George Bush was very naive on how you deal with these situations. So as a result of that, we have Iraq, we have Afghanistan. We've been in there now at Afghanistan, what, 15? Yes, a little over 15 years now.
Yeah.
And it's really irrelevant. Afghanistan is irrelevant to the United States. It really is. It should be placed back, as Admiral Lyons and I've said, back as a regional problem over there. Let Pakistan and India deal with it.
Right. Well, and we should have learned from the mistakes of what the Russians did when they went in there. They have basically the same military philosophy that was pushed by politics, and look at how it ended up becoming a quagmire for them.
Yeah. And Russia learned a big lesson from that, by the way.
Well, we should have, and that's for sure. And it seems like we've lost all those good, intelligent leaders that you're talking about. So, would you talk a little bit about your expose of the happenings in Benghazi? And, you started to mention that with the State Department getting into the arms trading business and some of the other things that led to that disaster.
Well, I think, number one, if you haven't read the book 13 Hours or you haven't seen the movie, you need to do that, because that'll give you the whole background that went south that particular day in 13 hours, where we lost 4 great Americans. But we know from our investigations it was an arms deal that was being transacted, funded by Qatar, and so we basically put in jeopardy our ambassador down in a not very secure compound in Benghazi. But again, 13 hours, it's just worth watching again, I would watch it again and read the book again too. It's so definitive. But here you have the State Department basically being running all these things across the world and embarrassing the United States, like the reset button with Russia. Just incompetent people, and then that was passed on to Senator Kerry, and you can see what happened there. So it's just been a travesty in the Middle East of trying to change the Middle East, and that's not what we need to do. We need to protect America, our own borders, strengthen the country, and not waste these billions and billions of dollars of all these things that are brought on by these inept politicians that get elected to office and make these horrible decisions. And I wish the admirals and generals would have stood up more too. they didn't stand up as strong as they should have when these things were happening.
Well, I'd like you to address one of the things that seems to have happened to our country is that our military, our good, solid, strong leaders have been gutted, and the people that are in there now that poor Donald Trump inherited are the ones that go along and get along and will suck up and you know, the manipulators. And the really good leaders, a lot of them have gone, they've retired, they've left the service. What can we do to change that?
Well, it's already in progress now. I've gotten some really great reports from the Pentagon that the military finally is walking down the hallways there with their head up again, and they're proud that we have a leader. But certainly so many things in social engineering in the military, the gays, the transgenders, and the political correctness within our military. And I think General Mattis will get a good handle on that, and you'll see a lot of that, basically political correctness. You can't say it anymore in our armed forces. We deal with reality and out in our mission, yeah. We're not going to be political correct and use all those progressive terms anymore. And we're going to be able to identify the enemies out there, like the radical Islamist again. That was taken out of the training manuals. So there's big changes going on, but it's only been 90 days. It's going to take a while to build up our fleets, build up our inventories, our Air Force, build new leaders, new warrior leaders, build them in the military academies at Annapolis, at West Point Air Force again. So all of those things that are happening now, but it's going to take a while to change all the devastation that's occurred within our military over the last two presidents. And with all of those tours back and forth between Iraq and Afghanistan, some of these soldiers, 8 or 9 turnarounds.
Oh, I know. It's awful.
I mean, it's just horrible. And last year we had the highest rate of suicides in our military. So it's going to take a while. I went through this in the Carter days, and after Reagan took over, where our morale was so low, and the recruiting was down so much. And as soon as Reagan came in, within the first 6 months, the whole thing had turned around because of new leadership. And that's what our troops respond to, is good leadership.
Yeah, they do, and they also recognize extremely bad leadership, and I can't imagine anything more demoralizing than the kind of social experiments that the last president and his administration tried to do to our proud military. And I'm also ex-military, and I fully understand one thing. The military is meant to do one thing. It's meant to protect our country, and it's meant to, bottom line, it's there to kill people when they have to do it, and they're not meant to be social engineers. And the fact that our military has been completely changed into a social experiment is an absolute travesty.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And the other thing is it's related to that is the destruction and the deterioration of our intelligence services, particularly the CIA. I know when I went into Antakya Hate, the CIA chief in Istanbul wanted to know why I was going in, and he wouldn't even come down to meet with me. He stayed in his offices in Istanbul. And the CIA at that time couldn't even cross the border into Syria. I walked through with the men that I told you about. Now, if I can do it as a 73-year-old, why can't some young CIA station chief conduct the same kind of intelligence operations I did? Interesting.
Yeah, it is. Well, and it also comes down to credibility. You have credibility in many of our intelligence agencies. The kind of policies they've had over the last 8 years and longer have ruined a lot of that credibility.
Yes, no doubt about it.
Well, I know that you consulted with the Trump transition team, and I visited with you when you were in the process of doing that. You were down in Florida. You were out in Washington D.C. You did had a lot of meetings. Tell our listeners what that process was like, and what you think about the willingness of the new administration to hear adult opinions instead of the stupid stuff that has been coming out of the left.
Well, there's a couple things here. I would encourage all of our listeners or your listeners to go to our foundation website, standupamericaus.org. We have all of that archived in there. And then our other foundation is the Scott Vallely Soldiers Memorial Fund, which was founded in the name of my son, who we lost in Special Forces in 2004. But I was not part of the transition team. I didn't want to be, but I wrote the American First papers in 2014, and you can Google that. And I sent two themes to Trump, America First, and the second one was the Path to Glory from the Revolutionary War days. Well, I'll be darned, early in the campaign, if Trump didn't pick up on the American First theme, and that became his theme for his campaign. So, I think that's the greatest contribution we made to Trump. And in the same time, I was communicating with Sebastian Gorka, who's now on the national security team there, with the lily pad strategy, Joint Strike Force operations. And then I've sent him for Tillerson to take over to Moscow the Syrian Renaissance Plan, which is the rehabilitation and reunification of Syria. So I provided them all that documents that they didn't have to spend a lot of time on. They could use them as they saw fit. And I think, fortunately, much of that has been used by the Trump campaign. I'm very happy about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the fact that they're listening to you is because you carry a lot of water, and you've been there, you've been on the ground, and you've seen what's been going on. So I certainly applaud you for all the efforts you've made in the Middle East, and I applaud the fact that you understand that the best thing we can do there is to help the locals in a very very open way to determine their own government. It's not our role to install leaders that may or may not be the right leaders. It's our role to provide the stability that allows the people to select the right leaders.
Yeah, and that's what we hope to do, and that's the same thing that I've talked to the Russians about, that Assad needs to retire. He can't reunify the country, and that he's only supported by a very small percentage of the population, which are the Alawites, and even a lot of them now don't support him. So, it's up to the Syrian people to determine that, and if they can form their new leadership council with Syrians that are looking forward and putting them in charge, then Syria has a chance to revive itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't want to get into conspiracy theories here, but there are some conspiracy theories, and there's conspiracy facts, and it's almost bizarre to me, but the fact that so many refugees, 11 million refugees have been created in Syria by all the goings on there, and we are turning around and exporting those refugees into Europe, and now into Central South America, and now into the United States. Some of them are not the kind of people we want here. Some of them are just innocent victims. But the bottom line is, why haven't we just provided the areas for those people to stay in their own country and try to re-inhabit their own country?
Well, they haven't been able to in Syria because it's been so volatile between the government and the different opposition forces over there across the country. So the recommendation under the Syrian Renaissance Plan is now, this year, to secure Western Syria, and to bring them back through the port cities of Latakia and Tartus, and to rebuild and retrain, going through in the west first. And then as ISIS is defeated and neutralized this year, then they can move forward east into northern Syria, into Aleppo. So that plan has all been laid out to the Russians. We want the Arabs to fund it, Saudi Arabia and others to fund it. And I think you're going to start seeing a lot of the Syrians who want to, in fact, want to live in their own country. They want to go back to their villages.
Well, sure they do. Yeah.
Many of them don't like. They don't like the food in Europe, and they don't match up. They don't assimilate. I was in one of the no-go zones in France 2 months ago in Saint Denis in northern Paris, and it's frightful. Taxis won't go in there. The police won't go in there. Paris has become a very dirty city. And so from that standpoint, we got to create these secure, safe zones now, and that's what we need to work on to get the refugees to go back to their own countries.
Right. And that's, I guess, the point of the whole thing is that it's got to be resolved within their own country, and we can't provide homes for everyone in the world that leaves their country. What we need to do is provide stability so they can stay in their country.
Yep, that's exactly right. Well, I guess border crossings are down to a very new low now, and so the word's getting out on our southern border. Things are changing just in 90 days. Dan, I've got to go see my grandson here. I know it's not quite an hour yet, but if you'd forgive me, but if you have anybody that has any questions, I'd be happy to take another 5 minutes, but then I've got to return to my family here.
Sure. No, that's no problem. The one thing I would like to get into before you do leave is talking about this deep state government that President Obama, ex-President Obama, seems to have instituted, and how he's funding that with money that was created through the Obamacare system and some other things. I just got a recent email from Bob Fanning about that. But in any case, this deep state government that's in Washington, D.C. right now, that's troubling. What do you think about that whole process?
Well, you remember up until the election, we called it the establishment, right? In the swamp. And now we find out that the deep state really is 2 to 3 layers, a swamp on a swamp on a swamp. And the Democrats and the progressives, to counter Trump with Soros money and other monies, to actually engage the deep state, which is located in all the parts of our government. And if it wasn't for WikiLeaks and for the Trump campaign, we would have never known the depth of the corruption in our government, particularly in some of the agencies that we thought were always very reputable. But when you layer it on down, the politicians that get elected and they do the swinging door thing in Washington, they go to some kind of a think tank or some other organization, a lobby group, and they rotate back into the government. Then below that, you have a lot of the senior bureaucrats who've been there, and many of them are very good. They keep the government functioning. They keep the trains on time. But yet they become very ingrained because we've made them union employees, so they've been influenced by that. You can't fire them. Congress has also gone into a deep state there with some of the people they have on their committees. So the whole government's been infected by people there that think that they know more than the American people, and they get tremendous salaries. They get tremendous benefits. The Washington area, has the highest, what do we call that? Standard
per capita income.
Income in the United States. And there's a reason. That's the deep state and the buildup of it. And so that's why we have to drain the swamp. And I wish some of these people who already have left government, like the head of the IRS, and he's a swamp dweller, that's for sure. but there's many others there, and we just don't need a gigantic swamp there of bureaucrats that we don't need to have a very streamlined and functioning federal government. So that's my answer.
Okay, well, that's a good answer. And do you have any suggestions on how our listeners can help President Trump to break the grip of those globalist intrigues in our national affairs?
Well, I would say, number one, don't listen to all the speculation that's going on from Washington and in the media. Only look and see what Trump actually does and measure the progress in that way and support him in pursuing that. We don't need to help the media along that has been against Trump and have lied and have manipulated the news to a degree that we've never seen before. And so stand up. If you got neighbors and friends, stand up for America. Believe what you must about this great country and our Constitution. And I have to stand up with against a lot of people all the time. But, I hold my ground. I'm not mean about it. I'm not angry about it. They're a lot more angry than I am. So I think from that standpoint, let's be good Americans, stand up, and let's look for today and tomorrow. Let's look for a better education system locally for our children. Let's see how we can improve that and really teach our kids history.
That's right.
So that would be my sage advice for the night.
Okay, well, that's great advice, General, and I would like to just give you a real quick chance to talk about Stand Up America US and several of the organizations that you've been involved with, and then we'll let you get on to a visit with your grandson.
Well, again, go to standupamericaus.org. We've archived everything we've worked on for the last 10 years. We support 20 other organizations throughout the country, like Accuracy in Media, Judicial Watch, and Turning Point with Charlie Kirk, going out to all college campuses. So that's the way. If people help us, then I in turn help a lot of other organizations. So any of your donations or assistance to us will be supported. And of course, you can do that on the internet if you go to our site. But it takes a lot of effort for a lot of good people that work for Stand Up America to make these things happen.
Well, it does, and thank you, General, for your time this evening. And I will say I've been a member of Stand Up America for some years now, and it is a terrific organization. And the work that you do is incredible. Some of the things that you do in the northwest part of Montana through the Glacial Forum and some of the other things that you've done are really, really credible. And I just want to thank you again for being a guest on our show. And God bless you and God bless your family.
Thank you, Dan. I look forward to coming back again if you're so kind to invite me.
Oh, well, I'll tell you, we'll be seeing you here this spring, I'm sure, at one of the events in Bozeman. So thank you again.
Yeah. Okay, Dan. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All righty. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bob, are you still on?
I most certainly am. I'm pretty excited about this one. A great interview.
Yeah, it was a great interview. And the one thing I wanted to, I figured we could wrap up the last few minutes of this program, but, there's a lot of people out there in the groups that I deal with and in the groups that you deal with that are so anti-military and so let's call it establishment military. And the one thing that comes out of these conversations that I've had with General Vallely over a period of years is that this man is no warmonger. This man is a gentleman that understands peace through strength and staying out of other people's affairs unless you absolutely have to become involved and then get in and get out and do the very least damage that you have to. Is that you've had some experience with General Vallely as well. I really admire a general staff member that has that kind of an attitude.
Well, absolutely, and You know, Dan, the biggest thing, and what I've always enjoyed about him and his views, he's very down to earth, very inside knowledgeable. He, of course, comes in his senior commands. He comes out of special operations and understands in depth these nations around the world. He was going to see General Assisi before Obama screwed it all up and he turned their back on him.
Absolutely, and the fact that Arab Spring, I'm one of the slides I've got on my Agenda 21 program that I do is a picture of Arab Spring where a young Arab gentleman's holding up a hammer and sickle. Isn't it amazing that the communism has such a strong relationship with radical Islam?
Well, not only huge relationship with a lot of segments of our society here now, and that's what, of course, scares us all. I noticed he talked about the levels, the depth of the swamp, and unfolding the different levels. And, of course, that you are an expert on Agenda 21 and how all those levels operate this nation right now on automatic. So I was glad he brought that up. Those levels in all those agencies that are ingrained is where the biggest disassembly has to take place, I would think.
Yeah, they've been indoctrinated, and so many of the agencies have been staffed and indoctrinated with this, progressive nonsense to the point where they really believe it. And we're going to have a program. I haven't got it completely lined up, but we may do it next week. But talking about how these agencies have, the ICLEI movement has taken over so much of the planning process in America. And that's something that a lot of our listeners are probably not aware of, but through UN Agenda 21 and one of the groups that were founded as a foundation under UN policy is ICLEI, the International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives. And that organization is involved with the American Planning Association, and it's literally taking over city after city all over the country. And we elect
council members and in cities, and we elect our county officials, and then they turn around and just turn it over to these ICLEIs to just let them run wild.
Well, and a lot of the county planners and the local planners are, I hate to say it, but most of the planners I've ever met are socialists. It's just the way they're raised. It's just the ways that they're educated and trained. And they see the individual rights as being something that needs to be subverted to the collective. And that's an area, I guess we're getting a little far-ranging from our conversation tonight with General Vallely, but I know that's one area that he's very alarmed about, is the fact that so many of these agencies have literally been taken over from top to bottom by the wrong people, and we need to get those agencies back under good leadership, and I think we can do that under President Trump if we just support him and just continue to help him, get those people in place.
Well, he did it with the State Department. He's doing it with our water resources. If he keeps going down that path, we can eliminate some of these agencies in their depth. Then we can, and you're right, he's here to talk about the military and the overseas things, but But he also showed an extreme concern for the swamp, and of course we know the swamp is the agencies.
Absolutely, and that's one thing that I've learned about General Vallely is the fact that he really does see the big picture.
Absolutely, and articulates it well.
Yes, he does. Yeah, very good man.
Great show tonight, Dan. Great.
Yeah, well, I'm very pleased, and with that, I see that we're at the end of our program time, but I would ask our listeners to return with us next week to help us continue to connect the dots, and we will bring another good guest or guests on board that I think we can eliminate a lot of the lies of the phony media or the fake news that we've been hearing from the mainstream press. And with that, Kelby, I'll turn the show over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this week's show with Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. God bless. Good night. We'll see you next Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific.